Now, the BBC has a brand new podcast out. Its star is Shamima Begum. And yes, you know precisely who she is. In the podcast, she says things, for example, I'm so much more than ISIS. It's 10 parts. And the former jihadi bride obviously tells her story. Is this entertainment? Is this a way of keeping you politically up to date? Is it appropriate to make such a programme and make a star out of Shamima Begum, you may wonder? Or maybe you can't wait to listen to it. Maybe you're fascinated at the very thought of it. I don't know. The number's 0344 499 1000. I'm sure you'll give me a ring and tell me what you think of it. But let's talk to Dr. Alan Mendoza, who's chair of the Henry Jackson Society. Hello, Dr. Mendoza. Good evening to you.
Hello, Vanessa.
Hello. So, I mean, you might say, how interesting. I mean, to hear Shamima Begum tell her story in her own words. We all know that she was a schoolgirl. She was attending school in the West End of London. She was bright. She did what she did with her friends. Maybe it would be fascinating to hear the story of her being radicalised and how it happened.
Well, I have to say, this thing is probably going to rival the Prince Harry saga in its level of banality and sort of nonsense that's going to come out of here. What is the BBC doing? Putting out a podcast system here about the life of somebody who joined a terrorist group, who admitted in this story that she knew what she was doing in joining the terrorist group, who then went out there and did not express any remorse for the activities of that terrorist group while she was there and beyond, and only seems latterly to have decided she wanted to come back to a country which her terrorist group was fighting. So I'm not sure it is going to be a fluffy sort of piece of things to be listening to. It is, however, a very deeply worrying thing for the national broadcast to be putting out. Is this a success story they want to be talking about? Is this a role model for young people? Why are they doing this?
Well, I suppose you might say, and you know, far be it from me to be an apologist for the BBC, since I no longer work there. As you quite patently see, I now work here. So I have left the doors of the British Broadcasting Corporation, but I did sojourn there for a good 30 years. I was going to say on and off, but mostly on, actually. I was there for years and years and years. It's not for me to explain what their intention is, but let me have a go at doing so. I'm assuming that the reason that they have made this 10-part podcast is that they think there will be a market for it, people who want to know how a bright London girl can be radicalised in this way. People who might also see it as something of a sort of, I suppose, adventure story. How did these girls escape the vigilance of their parents and their school and everybody who knew them, and walk through the airport and get to their destination? The kind of nuts and bolts, I suppose, of the adventure part of it all. Then, of course, the means by which they were radicalised. What reached them? Was it online? Who was it that they responded to? What was the kind of information that ignited their imaginations and got them hot under the collar and got them, you know, into a position whereby they were going to flout everything they'd been told and taught and go off and do this? Or indeed, was Shamima Begum encouraged by one or other or both of her parents? Because that's been suggested. And of course, what happened when they got there? What was the difference between what they were expecting and maybe romanticising and what they actually found? And I suppose the BBC thinks that there will be many people who will be interested. Doesn't mean they'll admire her, doesn't mean they'll want to emulate her, but it means they want to know and understand better. Maybe that would stop the same thing happening to other young people.
Oh, Vanessa, if only that were true. I like you. I like what you've done there. You've put the straw man up, and I'm now going to dissect it.
Okay, go on.
Rightly so. But let me explain why. Look, firstly, all the information about why she went and all the rest of it, it's all out there in the public domain already. You can pick it up, you can look at it, you can understand it. The only thing that's missing is her own voice in this. Now, we've heard quite a lot from Ms. Begum since her caliphate collapsed, basically. We've heard a lot about, stories about things that she's had interviews, she's had discussions. We've heard the court cases, why she wants to come back here. We've heard nothing about the remorse. We've heard nothing about, her feeling that anything bad happened under that time. I think it's intriguing that actually, she has, never suggested she wouldn't have done what she did. That's fascinating in itself from that point of view. And because she showed no remorse and because of who she joined and because of the crimes these people did, I'm not so sure it is relevant or appropriate to be giving her the voice to put her side of the story here. I'd rather hear from the victims of ISIS. I want to hear from the people who were raped, whose relatives were murdered, who were treated as sex slaves. I think those would be the stories that people should be listening to, the people who suffered under ISIS rule, rather than someone who voluntarily joined them and still has not said sorry for their activities.
But of course, you know, that there's no question that one wouldn't also want a podcast from, as you quite rightly say, the victims, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't have Shamima Begum present her own perspective as well. Do we know when this thing is going to start airing? Do we know whether people... Oh, so it hasn't happened yet. You haven't heard it. No one's heard it so far.
We've only heard the same, the sort of excerpts that we heard from Prince Harry's bit before that came out.
And while you're here, what do you feel about Prince Harry? You've mentioned it twice. I wasn't going to mention him to you. I was going to take a brief respite in wallowing in the tales of Shamima Begum instead of Prince Harry for a change, but you're determined to bring us right back to spare.
No,
Alan, so why don't you do it? Well, what are your thoughts on that? You seem very disapproving of Prince Harry as well as Shamima Begum.
I've only done it because I don't believe the BBC have made a sensible choice in terms of putting this out there. And, you know, what you're giving her the opportunity to do here is to present a very sanitized version of what she's done. And she's not going to tell you the truth about what happened out there. She's certainly not going to tell you about any crime she might have committed. Why would she? That would incriminate her in that sort of way. So she's going to give a tale in that way. And of course, that is similar to what Prince Harry has brought out, the stories he wants to bring and put out to the table. Now, look, you can bring out those stories if you want to. At least in his case, he's gone through a commercial route. He's written a book, whatever, in that sort of way. In her case, the BBC, the national broadcaster, is now promoting someone who the government rightly stripped of citizenship because she joined a terrorist group and expressed no remorse for it and still wanted to support it. So from that perspective, you know, I only bring him into it, not because, of course, there's an equivalence, but because you've got here stories from, you know, the mouth of one participant and you're not hearing the other side. I'd love it if there were a podcast by the BBC, 10 episodes of the victims of ISIS. Where's that? It's not coming, though, is it? The point is they know what they're doing here. What they're trying to do is suggest that the government was wrong to strip her of citizenship. There might be something wrong about this in this way, and that's not a healthy thing to do when we have other people who might decide, oh, actually, her crime wasn't that bad. Maybe we'll go and do that. Have you thought of that, perhaps? This might encourage other people to actually go out there and do it.
Dr. Mendoza, thank you very much indeed for joining me on the programme.